"You were in my dream," she said, and he froze. The rain drummed against the windows of the dusty Tome bookstore, creating rivulets that distorted the view of downtown Portland's morning rush. Liam Carter methodically arranged the new arrivals on the front display, his movements precise and practiced, each book finding its predetermined place. At 35, he had perfected the art of invisibility through routine. Wake at 6:30, open the store at 8, coffee at 9, lunch at 1. Close at 7, home by 7:30. It was a life designed to avoid surprises, complications, and most importantly, questions about who he used to be. The bell above the door chimed, and Maya Rodriguez entered, shaking droplets from her rainbow-striped umbrella. She was everything Liam's carefully constructed life wasn't: spontaneous, vibrant, unafraid of taking up space. Her art studio sat 3 doors down, and over the past 6 months she'd become a regular customer, though Liam suspected she bought more books than she could possibly read. "Morning, Liam," she called out, her voice cutting through the store's cathedral quiet. "Terrible weather for October, isn't it?" He nodded, offering his practiced smile, friendly but distant, warm but impersonal. "The forecast says it'll clear by afternoon," he replied, returning to his inventory clipboard. Maya wandered through the fiction section, her fingers trailing along the spines. She had this way of moving through the world as if she belonged everywhere, a quality that both fascinated and terrified him. "Have you ever noticed," she said, pulling out a worn copy of Gatsby, "how some books feel like they're waiting for the right person to find them?" Liam's hand stilled on the pricing gun. It was exactly the kind of observation that made Maya dangerous to his equilibrium. "That's a romantic way to look at retail," he said carefully. She laughed, the sound filling the empty spaces between the shelves. "Everything's romantic if you look at it the right way, don't you think?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer, because agreeing would mean acknowledging the way his pulse quickened when she smiled, the way he found himself checking the clock around 9 each morning, knowing she'd arrive for her daily visit before heading to her studio. Maya purchased the Fitzgerald novel, along with a collection of Mary Oliver poems, lingering at the counter longer than necessary. "You know," she said, studying him with those dark, perceptive eyes, "I've been coming here for months, and I still don't know anything about you. Where are you from originally?" "Here and there," Liam deflected, processing her credit card. "Military family. We moved around a lot." It was the lie he'd perfected, vague enough to discourage follow-up questions, boring enough to kill curiosity. Maya tilted her head, unconvinced but not pressing. "Well, wherever you're from, Portland's lucky to have you. This place would be just another corporate chain, without someone who actually cares about books running it." She gathered her purchases, pausing at the door. "Same time tomorrow." He nodded, already knowing he'd spend the next 23 hours alternating between dreading and anticipating her return. After she left, Liam stood alone among his books, surrounded by thousands of stories that weren't his own. He'd chosen this life, this name, this city, because it was 3,000 miles from Millbrook, Pennsylvania, where a different version of himself had died 15 years ago. That boy, Leo, had been reckless, passionate, unguarded. That boy had loved too freely and trusted too easily. That boy had lost everything in a single night of twisted metal and broken promises. Liam was safer, steadier, a man who kept people at arm's length and never let anyone close enough to hurt him again. But Maya's presence was eroding his defenses like water against stone, patient and persistent. He could feel himself wanting things he'd sworn off: connection, intimacy, the dangerous possibility of being known. The rain continued its assault on the windows as Liam returned to his inventory, each book a small barrier between himself and a world that demanded more than he was willing to give. Tomorrow Maya would return, and he would smile and deflect and pretend that her presence didn't make him feel like Leo again, young and hopeful and terrifyingly alive. The next morning arrived grey and damp, typical for Portland in October. Liam had barely slept, his dreams filled with fragments he couldn't quite piece together, the sound of carnival music, the smell of rust and motor oil, a voice calling a name he no longer answered to. He arrived at the bookstore an hour early, needing the familiar ritual of opening procedures to steady his nerves. Check the register, adjust the thermostat, start the coffee maker in the back room, turn on the vintage jazz playlist that gave the store its atmosphere. By the time he flipped the sign to open, he'd almost convinced himself that yesterday's conversation with Maya meant nothing, that his carefully maintained boundaries remained intact. She arrived at 9:15, later than usual, carrying 2 cups from the coffee shop around the corner. "Peace offering," she said, setting one on the counter in front of him. "For being nosy yesterday. I have this bad habit of pushing when I should just let people be." Liam accepted the cup, noting she'd somehow gotten his order exactly right. Dark roast, 1 sugar, no cream. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" Maya shrugged, but there was something odd in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty he'd never seen before. "Lucky guess? Or maybe I've been paying attention." They stood there for a moment, the coffee warm between them, the morning light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. "Actually," Maya said, her voice unusually hesitant, "can I tell you something weird? You'll probably think I'm crazy." Liam's chest tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Try me." She laughed nervously, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I had the strangest dream last night. You were in it, which is weird enough because I don't usually dream about people I know, but it wasn't here, wasn't Portland. It was somewhere else, somewhere that felt old, forgotten." The coffee cup trembled slightly in Liam's grip. "Dreams are just your brain, processing daily experiences," he said, his voice carefully level. "I'm not surprised I showed up after our conversation yesterday." Maya shook her head, her eyes distant, trying to capture something elusive. "But that's the thing, it didn't feel like my dream. It felt like a memory, but not my memory. Does that make sense? You were younger, different somehow. More open, I guess. Less guarded." She paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. There was this old carousel, all rusted and broken, next to what looked like a dried-up lake. The kind of place that used to be magical but had been abandoned for years. And someone kept calling you, but not Liam. They called you Leo. The cup slipped from Liam's hand, coffee exploding across the hardwood floor. The crash of ceramic seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Maya jumped back, startled. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Let me help clean." But Liam wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, his entire world narrowing to those impossible words. The carousel, the lake, Leo. No one knew about that place. He'd never told anyone, never returned, never even searched for news about it online. It existed only in his nightmares and the scar tissue that had formed around memories too painful to examine. "Liam?" Maya's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He forced himself to move, to breathe, to grab paper towels from behind the counter. "I'm fine, just slippery hands. Must be the rain." His voice sounded strangled even to his own ears. Maya knelt beside him, helping soak up the spreading coffee. "That name," she said softly. "Leo. It means something to you, doesn't it?" Liam stood abruptly, tossing the soaked paper towels in the trash. "It's not. I don't know any Leo. Your dream was just a dream, Maya. Random neurons firing. It doesn't mean anything." But she was looking at him with those artist's eyes, seeing past the surface to something deeper. "The thing is," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "in the dream you were scared, really scared, and there was someone else there, someone who loved you, trying to reach you, but you couldn't hear them over the sound of—" She trailed off, frowning. "Metal, screaming metal." Liam gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. 15 years of carefully constructed distance collapsed in an instant. The bookstore, his sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. Maya stood slowly, concern etched across her features. "I should go. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Whatever it is, whatever you're running from, you don't have to carry it alone." After she left, Liam locked the door and flipped the sign to closed, his hands shaking too badly to maintain the pretense of normalcy. He sank to the floor behind the counter, surrounded by the coffee stain that spread like an old wound reopening. For 3 days, Liam kept the bookstore closed, ignoring the concerned voicemails from regular customers and the increasingly worried texts from Maya. He sat in his sparse apartment, staring at a shoebox he hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside were the remnants of Leo's life: a driver's license from Pennsylvania, a faded photo of 2 teenagers at a county fair, a newspaper clipping about the accident that had killed Sarah Hendricks and left Leonard Leo Morrison in critical condition. The official story was simple: mechanical failure, no one at fault, a tragedy that could have happened to anyone. The truth was more complicated, wrapped in guilt and what-ifs that had driven him across the country to become someone else entirely. On the 4th day, Maya showed up at his apartment. He watched through the peephole as she stood in the hallway, holding a bag from the Thai restaurant down the street. "Liam," she called through the door, "I know you're in there. Mrs. Chen from 4B told me she saw you getting mail yesterday. I brought pad thai. It's getting cold." He found himself opening the door before he could think better of it. Maya didn't push past him, didn't demand answers. She simply held out the food and said, "You look like you haven't eaten in days." They sat at his small kitchen table, the only sounds the clink of forks against takeout containers. Finally, Maya spoke. "I've been having the dreams every night since I told you. They're getting clearer. I see her now. The girl with the blonde hair and the laugh that made you light up. Sarah. That was her name, wasn't it?" Liam's fork clattered to the table. "How could you possibly know that?" Maya reached across the table but stopped short of touching his hand. "I don't know. I really don't. But I think maybe I'm supposed to. Maybe that's why I was drawn to your bookstore in the first place. Why I keep coming back, even though I have more books than I could read in a lifetime." "This is insane," Liam said, his voice rough from days of silence. "Dreams don't work like that. You can't just see into someone else's past." Maya leaned back, studying him. "My grandmother used to say that some souls are connected across time and space, that they find each other when healing needs to happen. I always thought it was just folklore, but—" She gestured helplessly. "How else do you explain it? I described a place I've never been, a name you've never told anyone, a girl who died before I ever moved to Portland." Liam stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The city stretched out below, a safe, anonymous maze where he'd hidden for so long. "Her name was Sarah," he said finally, the words feeling strange after years of silence. "We were 18. She was my best friend's girlfriend, but I loved her anyway. That night at the carousel, she was going to tell him about us. We were going to come clean, face the consequences, build something honest." He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "The car's brakes failed on the way there. She died on impact. I spent 3 months in the hospital. By the time I got out, I couldn't stay. Everyone looked at me and saw either a victim or the boy who survived when Sarah didn't. So I became someone else." Maya rose slowly, approaching him like one might approach a wounded animal. "The friend," she said softly. "In my dreams, he's there too. At the carousel, waiting." "He never found out, did he?" Liam turned to face her, tears he hadn't shed in 15 years burning his eyes. "Tommy. His name was Tommy. He thought Sarah was coming to the carousel to accept his proposal. He had a ring and everything. After she died, he couldn't understand why she was in my car, why we were together that night. I let him believe she was just getting a ride, that it was coincidence. It seemed kinder than the truth. But the truth has a way of demanding to be heard, Maya said, and there was something in her voice, a recognition that made Liam's breath catch. Even after 15 years, even across 3,000 miles. She pulled out her phone, showing him a social media profile she'd found. Thomas Mitchell, he owns a coffee shop in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, married, 2 kids. He posts about Sarah every year on the anniversary. October 20th. Liam stared at the screen, at Tommy's older face, still recognizable beneath the years. "That's in 3 days," he whispered. Maya nodded. "I think that's why the dream started now. I think some part of you knows it's time to stop running." The drive to Millbrook took 4 days, with Maya insisting on coming along despite Liam's protests. They drove in shifts through the changing landscape, the Pacific Northwest giving way to mountains, then plains, then the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. With each mile, Liam felt layers of carefully constructed identity peeling away. By the time they reached the outskirts of his hometown, he was no longer sure if he was Liam or Leo, or something in between. Maya navigated while he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "The coffee shop is on Main Street," she said gently. "We don't have to do this today. We can find a hotel, take some time." But Liam shook his head. 15 years of waiting was enough. The shop was called Sarah's Place, and through the window Liam could see Tommy behind the counter, older, heavier, but still unmistakably the boy who'd been his best friend since kindergarten. The bell chimed as they entered, and Tommy looked up with a customer service smile that froze when he saw Liam's face. The coffee cup in his hand slipped, shattering on the floor in an echo of what had happened in Liam's bookstore just days before. "Leo?" Tommy's voice was strangled, disbelieving. "Big God, is that really you?" The coffee shop was empty except for them, the late afternoon sun slanting through windows decorated with photographs of the town's history. Liam saw it immediately, a photo of 3 teenagers at the county fair, Sarah between him and Tommy, all of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. "Hello, Tommy," he managed, his voice rough. "I know I should have called, should have come back sooner. I didn't know how." Tommy came around the counter slowly, as if in a dream. Then suddenly, he was pulling Liam into a fierce embrace, both men crying now, 15 years of grief and confusion dissolving in the space between them. They sat at a corner table while Maya tactfully busied herself examining the local art on the walls. Tommy's story spilled out, the months of searching for Leo, the private investigator who'd finally told him Leo had legally changed his name and disappeared, the years of wondering why his best friend had abandoned him in his darkest hour. "I thought you blamed me," Tommy said. "Thought maybe you knew something about that night, about why Sarah was with you." Liam took a shaky breath. This was the moment he'd run from, the truth that had sent him 3,000 miles away. "She was coming to tell you about us," he said quietly. "Sarah and we'd fallen in love. We were going to tell you that night at the carousel. She wanted to be honest with you, said you deserved that." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a sad, knowing sound. "I knew," he said simply. "Deep down, I think I always knew. The way you two looked at each other, the way she lit up when you walked in a room. I proposed that night because I thought I could stop it from happening, could make her choose me." He rubbed his face, years of carrying this truth evident in his gesture. "I've spent 15 years feeling guilty about that, wondering if my desperation somehow caused the accident, like the universe was punishing all of us for not being honest with each other." Maya approached then, setting down 3 cups of coffee she'd made behind the counter. "The universe doesn't punish," she said gently. "It just sometimes takes a while to heal." Tommy looked at her curiously, and Liam found himself explaining the impossible dreams, the strange connection that had brought him back here. Tommy listened without skepticism, perhaps because he'd lived with his own inexplicable experiences. "I dream about her too," he admitted, "but in my dreams, she's always trying to tell me something, and I can never quite hear it. Maybe she was trying to tell me to find you." As the sun set over Millbrook, the three of them sat in the coffee shop, named for a girl they'd all loved in different ways. Tommy showed them photos of his family, his wife, who knew the whole story and had encouraged him to never give up hope of finding Leo. He talked about the coffee shop, how he'd named it for Sarah because she'd always talked about opening a place where people could come to feel less alone. "You could stay," Tommy said suddenly, "both of you. The town's different now, bigger. There's room for a bookstore. We could be neighbors again, but honest this time." Liam looked at Maya, who'd been quietly sketching in her notebook, the three teenagers from the photograph, but older, wiser, still connected by invisible threads. "I have a bookstore," he said slowly. "In Portland. A life I built, even if it was built on running away." Tommy nodded, understanding. "But you'll visit, both of you, now that the truth is out?" Liam reached across the table, grasping his old friend's hand. "Yes, no more running, no more hiding." As they prepared to leave, Tommy stopped them at the door. "The carousel is still there, you know. The city restored it last year. It works again." He smiled sadly. "I take my kids sometimes. I like to think Sarah would approve." That night, before leaving Millbrook, Liam and Maya drove to the carousel. It stood lit against the darkness, painted horses frozen in their eternal gallop, music playing for no one. Liam stood where he'd waited 15 years ago, where 3 lives had been meant to change direction. Maya took his hand, grounding him in the present. "She's not here," she said softly, "but you are. You survived, and that has to mean something." As they drove away, Liam felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of bonds he'd tied around himself for protection. He wasn't Leo anymore, that reckless boy who'd loved too hard. But he wasn't just Liam either, the man who'd tried to live without truly living. He was something new, someone who could hold both the grief and the growth, the past and the possibility of a future. Back in Portland a week later, Liam reopened the bookstore. Maya helped him rearrange the displays, adding a small section for local artists' work. Tommy had promised to visit for Thanksgiving, to bring his family to see the life Leo had built as Liam. The dreams had stopped for Maya. Their purpose apparently served. But she still came for coffee each morning, still traced her fingers along the book spines, still made observations that cut straight to the heart of things. "You know," she said one morning, watching him water the new plants she'd convinced him to add to the store, "some people believe that when we dream of strangers, we're really dreaming of parts of ourselves we haven't met yet." Liam considered this, then pulled a book from the shelf, the same Gatsby Maya had bought the day everything changed. "Maybe," he said, handing it to her, "or maybe some souls really are connected across time and space, finding each other when healing needs to happen." She smiled, that dangerous, beautiful smile that had first cracked his defenses. Outside, Portland's rain had given way to unexpected sunshine, illuminating dust motes that danced between the shelves like tiny possibilities. The bell chimed as a customer entered, and Liam moved to greet them, no longer hiding behind careful distance. He'd learned finally that some truths demand to be told, some connections refuse to be severed, and sometimes the only way forward is to stop running from what lies behind.